Coming up on Tech News Weekly, I, Mikah Sargent, am at the helm today, but don't worry because Jason Howell does stop by. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first I want to tell you that we are joined by Dan Moren of SixColors to talk all about the Apple event. We talk about the Apple Watch and the AirPods Pro. Before the break, there's Apple Watch Ultra talk, of course. We got to talk about that new model, and even though it's more pricey, kind of what it provides before we come back with Dan Moren to talk about the iPhone 14 lineup. New colors, new features, the dynamic island. What the heck is that? All of that gets covered by Dan Moren. Then Ben Schoon of 9 to 5 Google stops in with Jason Howell, who joins us for a pre-recorded interview. And this is all about the Google event. It has been announced. It's coming soon. And so we get kind of an early preview at what is expected to be announced at this event before we round things out with a look at GPT-3 and other large language models and the data they have on all of us, because they are scooping up lots of data online to create these interesting chatbots and responses to the text we input into the system. So stay tuned for a jam-packed show of Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 251, recorded Thursday, September 8th, 2022. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by IRL, an original podcast from Mozilla. IRL is a show for people who build AI and people who develop tech policies. Hosted by Bridget Todd, this season of IRL looks at AI in real life. Search for IRL in your podcast player. And by Collide. You can meet your security goals and pass your audit without compromising on your privacy. Visit collide.com/TNW to find out how. If you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag, including a t-shirt, just for activating a free trial. And by Dell, client solutions devices, orchestrated by the experts at CDW, which deliver a more personalized user experience with adaptive AI-based software that boosts collaboration wherever your team works. Learn more at cdw.com/Dell Client. Hello, and welcome to Tech News Weekly. That's right, that's what this show is. This is, of course, a show where we talk every week to the people making and breaking the tech news. Jason Howell is not precisely here with us, but I think you'll be in for a surprise a little later in the show where he sort of kind of joins us. But until then, you are here with me, Mikah Sargent, and we have a great show planned for you today. So let's kick things off because yesterday on a Wednesday, which is a little odd for Apple, Apple held its Far Out event, which we can now officially confirm, although we were pretty sure, was Apple's September iPhone event. The company revealed several new products, different models and sizes and types, and joining us to talk about it, and I'm so excited for him to be here, it's SixColors' own Dan Moren. Welcome back to the show, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah, so let's kick things off with, and I should mention to all of our listeners/viewers out there, Dan was kind enough to let us chat with him through the ad break. So we're actually going to get a little bit more time with him because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Apple's event. So for this first section, we'll talk about the Apple Watch and the AirPods Pro. Kicking things off with the Apple Watch. There were lots of rumors leading up to the event. Did we get what was expected? And if so, what was it that we got?
Well, I do think we got what was expected, although maybe people didn't know precisely what to expect. We'd heard these rumors of a larger, more expensive Apple Watch for some time. They started out as sort of these rumors about like an extreme, like outdoor Apple Watch, something competing with, say, the Garmin's offerings for sort of people who do a lot more extreme outdoor sports, adventure outdoor sports. And then it morphed into sort of an Apple Watch Pro, but it seems like those initial rumors were right on the money. So we ended up with the Apple Watch Ultra, which is designed specifically for people doing these very intensive outdoor sports, whether it be mountain climbing or ultra marathoning or diving with scuba diving, etc. So this more expensive Apple Watch is it's really rugged. It's got a little bit of a different design, but it's designed to withstand these sort of extreme temperatures and to provide features for people doing these kinds of activities, such as dive computing, wayfinding with your GPS, working for people who having these buttons and stuff designed to work with people with gloves, etc. So I think that was one big element everybody was looking forward to. And then, of course, we got smaller revamps to both the main Apple Watch line with the Series 8 as well as the Apple Watch SE. So across the board, I think we pretty much got what people expected out of this event. But yeah, still a lot to unpack there.
Absolutely. So let's start with the, I hate to say it, but when everybody's focused on this new, it's hard to find as much excitement in the Apple Watch Series 8 and the new Apple Watch SE. But I do want to start there because folks might be wondering, okay, so all we've heard about is this Apple Watch Ultra and all of these things that the Apple Watch Ultra gets. What is new in the Series 8? Why would someone want to upgrade from an earlier Apple Watch, be it Series 3, 4, 5, 6, to the Series 8? What can they expect?
Yeah, the Series 8 is definitely more of a meager update over the Series 7. Obviously, it brings all the features the Series 7 had, which include blood oxygen, ECG, heart rate notifications, the bigger screen, etc. The main new feature that Apple really drew attention to in its presentation was temperature sensing. And specifically, they've really targeted this feature to talk about ovulation. So in terms of cycle tracking for women and being able to detect changes from sort of the baseline temperature and figure out whether or not it might be an indication of whether or not a person is ovulating. And so it's an intriguing move. I mean, the temperature sensor had been rumored. As always, Apple sort of has this difficult task with health sensors of being able to collect information and provide useful insights without necessarily sort of saying, we're a medical device and you should use this to monitor your medical situation. People may, but obviously that kind of stuff requires a much higher bar in terms of things like FDA approval. So in this case, they've shied away from saying like, oh, you can check your temperature, or even we'll tell you if we think you might be running a fever, so much as targeting this one specific thing. And I think they believe they even called it retrospective ovulation to suggest like this is past the event. We believe maybe this has happened, but like not necessarily positioning as something where you should take action based on the information the Apple Watch is providing you. Beyond that, the other sort of things that they discussed that are kind of interesting are new features that also came to the newest iPhone, which are the crash detection and sort of the ability to figure out whether or not you might have been involved in a car accident. And that uses sort of the same technology, builds upon this idea of fall detection, which has been in a few different Apple Watches up to date, and uses these new sort of high G accelerometers and gyroscopes to sort of confirm whether or not this is a case where you might actually have been in a car accident. I think that does come to some of the previous watches as well. There's a lot in here that does get sort of trickles down to earlier watches of a certain generation, which I think is one of the reasons this does feel like a little bit of a thinner update, is that some of these things are available in other Apple Watches as well.
Yes, that exactly. With the watchOS updates kind of being separated from that, it does get a little difficult. I did find it interesting that with the temperature sensing, Apple was thinking about how environmental temperature might play a factor in it. And so there are actually two sensors in the watch, one sort of below the display to kind of measure the temperature in the air, and then one that is actually touching against your wrist or is underneath where your wrist touches the device so that it can kind of compare the two. But yeah, that kind of sort of trying to figure out what was watchOS 9 versus what was the Apple Watch was a little confusing. And then as far as the Apple Watch SE goes, is it true that the Apple Watch SE will get the latest kind of chip that matches with the rest of the Apple Watch lineup?
Yeah. The high end, I think it's the S8, which is the same as in the Series 8. This kind of falls on the same idea Apple has taken with the iPhone SE, which is we're going to rev it and have, maybe not all the newest features. It doesn't get the always on display. It doesn't have the largest screen, but it does get the innards that are the most powerful, that are up to date with the current state of the art. So that's one way it can draw in customers by saying like, all right, look, this doesn't necessarily have all the bells and whistles, but it is just as powerful as the newest watch we're making, and it's a fraction of the price too, which is obviously a huge selling point.
Absolutely. And that, I think, I guess one other question. When can folks get their hands on, is it available for purchase? Will it be available for purchase? And what are we looking at price-wise on the new Apple Watches?
Sure. Yeah, they are available for purchase now. In fact, they went up, I believe, right as the event was happening. And I think the Series 8 you can buy starting at, I want to say $499. Maybe $390. Sorry, $399.
Yeah, $399.
Yeah, sorry. It's the Apple Watch pages are always a little bit more confusing in terms of laying out prices.
Yes, and then you have to kind of dig in first to find them.
It's like, let's choose your watch. Tell me about what watch you want, and then we'll tell you how much it costs. Let's not talk about money. Let's not cheapen this exchange with money. And then I think the SE has gone down to $249, which is cheaper than the previous version, and obviously gets some extra features there as well. And it's finally, we should note, last year, the Series 3, which is the older Apple Watch, stuck around, even though it wasn't going to be getting watchOS 9. But it seems like it has finally been excised from Apple's pages. So, yes, if you're buying an Apple Watch, you don't have to be stuck with the Apple Watch Series 3.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, and that $249 price is kind of like, you suddenly are, I think Apple's very clever about that, and it's opening the opportunity. Yeah, exactly. It's opening the opportunity for me to, consider that as gifts for family members that, I would like to have watches for the health and safety features. All right, let's talk about the Apple Watch Ultra real quick. This, of course, is the big kahuna, titanium and a special button. But what all is coming to the Apple Watch Ultra that makes it exclusive and different from the Apple Watch Series 8 and the Apple Watch SE, other than just that more expensive price?
Well, a lot of things here. Well, first of all, it's got a larger size. That's a 49 millimeter, which is the biggest Apple Watch Apple has made to date. And the screen is slightly larger than the Series 8, and I think they say 27% or so larger than the SE. In addition to that, it's really designed to be the most rugged watch. You can see they changed the design here, right? So it's got that sort of little flat lip where the screen is, rather than having the rounded edges of glass. The primary reason for that being, if you've ever had an Apple Watch, it's really easy to catch those corners on stuff and bang them up or crack your glass. So this sort of provides a little bit more protection for the glass. It's also got some higher degrees of ruggedness. It can go up to 100 meters in the water. It's got I think it has a higher sort of dust resistance or something, military standards. This is...
Yes.
Apple loves to talk these things up. I don't even know what that means, but I guess it's altitude, high temperature, low temperature, temperature shock, immersion, freeze thaw, shock, and vibration. So it's like they've really, made this thing tough enough to handle the most extreme environments that it's going to find itself in. So that's a big chunk of what they're doing here is creating this design that is really aimed at people in extreme conditions, whether it be cold or hot or dry or dusty or what have you. And then it's also got, I think we talked about the design changing a little bit. The crown is like a little bit more bigger and more like notched almost, and it's got a little bit more protection around it. And then I think they've got like what was it? The other thing? Oh, they've just sort of like the whole case, being titanium and whatever, is a little bit more resistant to these kinds of elements.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that was most striking to me was that raised lip on the watch. Apparently, that's where many people end up accidentally kind of cracking, is by those edges running up against something. So,
someone who broke an Apple Watch earlier this year and had to get a new one. Yeah, I broke my Series 4. I dropped it on a hard tile. Would the Ultra have survived? I don't know. But I did enjoy my brief moment, my 4 or 5 months of having the newest Apple Watch around before the Series 8 came out.
Yes, that is that is kind of pesky that it would came out. All right, let us briefly talk about. I mean, there's a bunch that could be said about the Apple Watch Ultra, but definitely this premium device that I think, yes, some people will purchase just for the sake of having the most premium. But for folks who want to use it as a dive computer and all of that, it certainly is kind of Apple put its money where its mouth is. Sort of, that works with this device. Let's talk about, though, AirPods Pro before we run into a break. The next generation, so this is the second gen AirPods Pro. And I have to tell you, so I was at the event, and it was kind of wild how much out loud reactions there were regarding the AirPods Pro. I didn't know that so many people like these, and Apple ended up saying these are Apple's most popular AirPods. The first gen of the AirPods Pro, obviously, because these weren't out yet. But this type of AirPods were Apple's most popular. And so I'm curious, what can people expect in the second gen AirPods Pro, given that if you look at them dead on like that, they look a lot like the first gen. But
sure,
there's some stuff packed in.
There's some extra stuff backed in. So a lot of the secret sauce for the AirPods relies on these H series chips that Apple's been doing. And to date, we've really had the H1, which has been in pretty much all the AirPods. Apple's first rolling out the H2 in these AirPods Pro, which they say are going to deliver better sound. They've redesigned it with a custom-built driver and an amplifier, so all of that should lead to less distortion, better reproduction of sound, etc. That's a big selling point, as well as providing the ability to do better noise canceling, which is, again, one of the trademarks of the Pro over the standard AirPods, is these active noise cancellation and the transparency modes. So that makes it easier to sort of filter out background sounds, as well as touch controls that they're allowing. So previously, I'm wearing my first generation AirPods Pro now. You could click them, squeeze them together to play or pause, or to activate your transparency or noise canceling modes. Now there'll be a touch control on them as well, where you can swipe on them in order to do things like change the volume or trigger other features. So that's kind of an interesting way to switch up how they've done the control here. So a lot of that is sort of the big part is like you said, a lot of it's not external, but it's internal in terms of what the performance of these things look like. Mm-hmm. And then they mentioned a couple other specific features, one of which is of the personalized spatial audio, which I'm fascinated by because I don't entirely understand how it works. Yeah, obviously, spatial audio has been a big push for Apple in the last year. So, that's
there you are. Yeah.
It's a big push for Apple to have this. So they're sort of trying to take it to the next level with this personalized idea, which uses your phone to create a map, basically, of your head. I'm interested because spatial audio to date hasn't been something that I feel is really compelling to me, but Apple has sort of doubled down on it here and said, we're going to make it even better. And I was like, all right, well, I'm intrigued to see what you think that means.
Yeah, I have to say I'm right there with you on that. I was kind of, I haven't really done a whole lot of spatial audio, partially because my first gen AirPods are, the noise cancellation doesn't work anymore. So I'm hoping they also fixed all of those issues that they had with the first gen model, whatever it was that was causing the crackling and the failure of the noise stuff.
And we should mention also to me the best improvements of this were in the case, the charging case.
Yeah.
Because so they added it can be charged with your Apple Watch charger, which is great. It's one less cable you might have to take with you, or a more compact cable. It has a speaker on the bottom now, so if you need to find it, it can actually play a louder beep if you've lost your AirPods, as I'm sure many of us have done. And I believe it has the precision finding built in as well. So if you have a newer iPhone with the U1 chip, it can more easily let you locate it. And then they added a little connector for a lanyard, which, speaking as somebody who often wished, wow, why do I have to just put these in my pocket where I easily lose them? Having something like a lanyard or some other strap you can attach here without putting a bulky case around the existing case is, I think, a big win.
Absolutely. In fact, that's how I have my first gen is a case from Nomad and then a lanyard from some third party because it had the lanyard loop on the side. Now that it's built in,
you don't even need it anymore.
Great.
There we go.
Yay! Yay! All right, let us take. We'll briefly mention that those AirPods will launch, let's say, very soon. You can pre-order on Friday at 5 a.m. Pacific, so that's kind of tonight for people who live in Pacific time. It's really in the morning, starting at $249, and they will be available Friday, September 23rd. But we're going to take a quick break before we come back with more from Dan Moren on the iPhone 14 lineup. All right, it is time to talk about IRL, an original podcast from Mozilla, and this podcast is actually bringing our podcast, Tech News Weekly, to you this week. Thank you, IRL, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. If you are curious, IRL is a show for people who build AI and people who develop tech policies. This is the stuff that is so important. In fact, my story of the week that'll be coming up soon is all about AI and tech policy and the importance of that. Hosted by Bridget Todd, this season of IRL looks at AI in real life. Who can AI help? Who can it harm? Well, the show features fascinating conversations with people who are working to build more trustworthy AI. AI you can actually trust? That would be a good thing to have. For example, there's an episode about how our world is mapped with AI. The data that's missing from those maps tells as much of a story as the maps themselves. You will hear all about the people who are working to fill in those gaps and take control of the data. You'll also check out an episode that's about gig workers who depend on apps for their livelihood. It looks at how they're pushing back against algorithms that control how much they get paid and seeking out new ways to gain power over data to create better working conditions. And for political junkies, I see out there are episodes about the role that AI plays when it comes to the spread of misinformation and hate speech around elections, which of course is a huge concern for democracies around the world. A recent episode, AI from Above, this is season 6, episode 3, is all about how the world is surveilled and how the data that is surveilled from up above is collected and put together. So not only kind of is this an opportunity to look at the way that AI plays a role in collecting all of this data, but it also looks at kind of the power dynamics within it. How is this data collected, but then how is it controlled? Who has the power over this data? What if some of this data should be removed? Who do you go to and talk to say, hey, I don't want my information to be out there? And how can we as individuals make that change? Can we? Is there a way to go about saying, I would like for you, Google Maps, to blur out my address, my home, on your service? There's a lot to dig into there, and I think the really unique aspect of this season is all about this power dynamic that plays such an important role in these podcasts and largely in AI. So search for IRL in your podcast player. Yeah, it's easy to remember, IRL. And of course, we'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to IRL for their support of Tech News Weekly. Now, let's head back to the show. All right, we are back from the break, and it is time to welcome back Dan Moren from SixColors, this time to talk about the iPhone 14. Thank you for joining us for 2 segments here, Dan.
Oh, my pleasure. Nothing more than I like talking about Apple events.
So yeah, let's talk about the iPhone 14 lineup, because there were some, not surprises if you've read any of the rumors, but changes from last year. Can you talk about what the lineup looks like this year in comparison to last year?
Sure. Well, the big omission this year is obviously there is no new mini-size phone. Apple has instead chosen to do an iPhone 14, which is basically the same size as the iPhone 13, and then do an iPhone 14 Plus, which is a larger size that's closer to the iPhone 14 Pro Max with a larger, I believe it's a 6.7-inch screen. So, they've decided, obviously, people seem to prefer the bigger phones to the smaller phones. So that's the big distinction there. And then, of course, we have the iPhone 14 Pro and the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which follow along with the 13 Pro and the 13 Pro Max. So continuing that sort of bifurcated lineup, but getting rid of the smaller size in favor of another larger phone.
Yep, it was interesting to see that. I know some people were certainly disappointed at the loss of the Mini, but it seems like that is the way of things. Now, we've got, of course, as Apple always has, or has for quite some time, sort of differentiated between a standard and a Pro model. So let's start with the standard model with the notch, or as I have decided to call it, based on Jason Snell's own naming, the static peninsula. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, I think that's hilarious. Tell us about the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. What can folks expect that makes it new, given that it's using a chip from the previous gen iPhone?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. As you point out, it's using the same A15 Bionic chip that we saw last year's iPhone 13 line. The slight distinction, they've basically used a slightly better version of the chip here. It's an A15 Bionic with 5 cores in its GPU, which is up from 4 cores. Probably not going to make a huge difference for most people if you're looking to eke some extra performance out of it, but a little bit helps. The main other improvements here, we obviously have the camera system, which gets a little bit of a bump. This is using the advanced dual camera system, although it's the same 12 megapixel that we saw in last year's iPhone 13. And then it's got the front camera also adds autofocus, which is another one of the big features they sort of pulled out this year in terms of the camera system. And then, they've also got this thing they've calling, and I'm going to have to look deeper into this because I could not tell you based on the name what this means. This is the Photonic Engine that Apple has been talking about with its new, great branding, if nothing else. But if you ask me to explain in a breath what exactly that means, I think I would struggle a little bit.
Not
it's
even
an engine
Apple could explain
with
it
light.
in a breath.
It makes your camera better, everybody. That's all you need to know. So I think that's the main thing you want to take away from that. And then we also add this action mode, which is a improved sort of stabilization mode where you can shoot stuff without a lot of the judder that you might see otherwise if you're a fast moving scene. So that'll be something that people with taking a lot of movies will like to see. And then one of the other big features that we talked about sort of across the iPhone line is this new Emergency Sos with satellite feature, right? This is the satellite emergency feature that we had heard some rumors about, which comes to the entire iPhone 14 line and essentially lets you have limited connection with a satellite in cases where you might be lost or trapped or someplace where you do not have a cell signal. So that is probably one of the big features that Apple rolled out across the iPhone line this year, and it's an interesting one. I think it's tricky to market a phone based on a feature that you hope nobody ever needs, right?
Yes, exactly. You don't want to have people use it, but if they do need to use it, then it is available. And it will be available to use in the U.S. and Canada in November, and it's free for 2 years. We don't really know what that means, though. Yeah, exactly. What will it cost after that? But why would I thought this was a common question, and I'm curious your take on this. Why does this why will this eventually cost money? Can you explain kind of what's involved in this?
Yeah. So, basically, Apple has designed a system whereby these phones incorporate an antenna that can communicate with satellite. Obviously, that's not something most phones can do. You've probably seen satellite phones in movies and the like, which are these very clunky things with a big antenna that folds out. You need to have satellites to talk to, and that's an expensive proposition. We have private companies that launch satellites into orbit, and we've seen some increasing partnerships between satellite companies and cell phone providers. I think just last week, T-Mobile and Starlink announced a partnership where T-Mobile customers will be able to use Starlink satellites for certain limited features. It's expensive to keep satellites in orbit and expensive to launch new satellites. So one suspects that whatever company they've made a deal with, and I don't believe they have publicly stated what that is, needs to get some subsidies, some ongoing costs. So I believe there's a similar service available from Garmin that costs in the range of $15 a month, I believe. I am a little skeptical that Apple will try that. I think the 2-year period might extend, or we might see something announced later where, Apple has basically subsidized this, because I think they don't want to be in a position where it's like, well, that person could have been saved if only they'd paid $15 a month to Apple. But sadly, they did not, and they were lost. And it was like, well, that seems like really bad PR. So we'll see how that develops over the course of the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm eager to learn a little bit about that as well. All right, we should definitely move on then to talk more about the Pro line, which features some very interesting changes that I think people weren't necessarily expecting to happen the way that they did. I will say, shared a little tidbit about this morning on a podcast I record with Dan Moren called Clockwise. And it was that while we were there watching the event, because for folks who don't know, I was invited to attend the event. And when they announced the dynamic island, which Dan will tell us about in a moment, there was a chuckle that went through the room. So the name's still taking some time to settle in, but it was quickly followed by, as people started to see what in the world the dynamic island was and what it was going to provide. So tell us about the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max.
Yeah, so a few features. Let's get this out of the way before we talk about the dynamic island, which I think is the most interesting part. We've got an updated screen with a better promotion technology that does the adaptive refresh rates, which means now there's an always-on display because they can throttle down to 1 refresh per second, basically, rather than the previous one, I think, only went down to 10. So that allows the same sort of always-on display that we've seen on recent versions of the Apple Watch. There's a better chip in there. We've got the A16 Bionic, which will be this sort of flagship chip for the year, I imagine. And then we've got an upgraded camera system that has a 48 megapixel camera, which now allows things like, I think there's now a 2x the zoom they sort of get away with by doing a cropping of the standard image. So all of those things are kind of the standard things you expect. A better display, it's brighter, better chip, better camera, and that's all to the good. And then, of course, the big thing that we have, as we mentioned, is the dynamic island. What is the dynamic island? Well, we've all gotten accustomed to the notch that we've seen in recent models of the iPhone, which is where the little camera sensors are at the top of the screen. This year, there was a big rumor that this would be replaced by a capsule or pill or lozenge shape, which is exactly what we got here. Now, what's fascinating about it is that one of the sensors is actually embedded in the screen. So even though you see this sort of oblong shape, it's actually more like a circle and like a smaller oblong shape, but they're using the screen to sort of make it look like it's actually just one unbroken line. And then they're leaning into it further with this idea of the dynamic island, which is saying, hey, what if we not just like pretend that space doesn't exist and feel like we're really embarrassed by it, and instead bring it to the forefront and use it as a ground for things like notifications. So they showed off a number of really interesting animations and styles where essentially this can be used to display information at all periods of time. Like they showed off like sports scores hanging out up there. Like if you want to follow those in live time, sort of real time as you're watching a game or following a game, it can be relegated to this little strip at the top without interfering with the rest of your interface. Other things like when calls come in, you get a notification, or when you switch away from the music app, it can still keep like the album art in this little icon up there. Basically using all this space that was otherwise going kind of unused, right? Like, the notch had to be sort of planned around in the earlier versions of the iPhone. But here we're really saying, hey, let's take advantage of this space that is otherwise just going to be wasted and really use it to the utmost as we can. So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves and whether it comes to future iPhones. My bet is yes, you don't spend this much time developing a feature like this to use it on one phone and then move on. Yeah,
I agree. I think this cool operating system stuff is a long time, going to continue a long time. Just quickly before we let you go, anything else about the iPhone 14 lineup, and should folks, if they're wanting to get it on day one, when should they look to pre-order this device?
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention, of course, is colors. There's been a lot of consternation about colors in previous years. I think, unfortunately, the iPhone 14 line suffered from a bit of a desaturation this year. So you've got like blue and purple options that are very pale in the main iPhone 14, alongside Apple's new ubiquitous Midnight and Starlight sort of tinted options. There is a bold red version, product red, still available. So if you're looking for a big, bright color, that's where to go. And then on the Pro line, you've got the sort of metallic options, the silver, the gold, the graphite, space black. That's one, the space black this year, which I hear is quite black, which is nice, as well as the deep purple, which is the one that I'll probably be ordering. And if you want one, you're going to have to probably jump on it pretty quick. Tomorrow, Friday, the September 9th, pre-orders start at 5 a.m. Pacific, 8 a.m. Eastern. So if you're looking for one, you're going to have to get in there quick because they tend to go fast.
Indeed they do. Well, Dan Moren, thank you so much for your time. If folks want to follow you online and check out all the great work you're doing, where should they go to do so?
You can follow me over at SixColors.com, where we'll have a lot more about all of Apple's latest announcements, as well as over on the Clockwise podcast on Relay FM with Mikah.
That is a great place to go. Thank you, Dan, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
All righty, folks. With that, Jason Howell will be joining us here momentarily. But first, I do want to take a quick break so I can tell you about Collide. We're bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. If you're listening to this podcast right now, then the odds are good that at some point you're going to go through an audit like SOC 2 or ISO 27001. And when you do, you'll have to answer some tough questions about endpoint security. They are making sure that you've got your security figured out. These questions include, do all your company laptops have their disks encrypted? Does everyone have the company's password manager installed? Do you have a system in place to monitor and maintain compliance throughout your cross-platform fleet? Whew, some tough questions. Even if you're confident that the answer to all of those questions is yes, the bigger question is this: can you prove it to an auditor? If you're not quite sure how you'd go about proving compliance across your fleet of devices, well, then you need Collide. Collide is an endpoint security tool for Mac, Windows, and Linux devices that does things MDMs can't and gives you the visibility you need to achieve and maintain compliance. And this is the best part. Collide, they don't just resort to surveilling employees or locking down devices. We know that in many cases that doesn't work. It makes your employees hostile to the software that's trying to protect them and protect you. Instead, it works with the end users to resolve issues and relies on their cooperation and, most importantly, their informed consent. That's what makes it work. You can meet your security goals and pass your audit without compromising on privacy. Visit collide.com/TNW to find out how. If you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag, including a t-shirt, just for activating a free trial. Oh, and by the way, I can confirm that t-shirt is super soft. I think I just washed it, so I don't have it with me, but it's such a cozy shirt. That's KOLIDE.com/TNW, collide.com/TNW. And please visit that link because that lets them know that you heard me talking about the shirt, and that's why you went to the website, collide.com/TNW. Thank you, Collide, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. And now it's time to hear from Jason.
Hey, Mikah, it's me, Jason. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not there with you today, but I'm there in spirit because I know you were at the Apple event and there's probably a good amount of Apple in this show. I thought I'd balance it out with a little Google because the day before the Apple event, Google announced its Pixel hardware event for next month. That's October 6th. It's a Thursday, so it happens right before this show records on that day. Surely we'll be talking about it then. The event begins 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern on October 6th. And I thought I'd invite Ben Schoon from 9 to 5 Google on the show to talk a little bit about what to expect from Google on that day. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always great to get you on. Appreciate your time today. So let's start a little bit with kind of, before we get to the devices and everything, talk a little bit about this promo video because Google, announced the event. They had this quick flash promo video to get people, I guess, excited for the event and everything. And I guess one thing that surprised me about it, is that we saw the things that we expected, the Pixel 7, the Pixel 7 Pro, the Pixel Watch. These are all things that we're hear about in a month. Then the Pixel Buds Pro were there, and I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. Those things are already out. Well, if you had to guess, do you have any thoughts on why that device was included in there? Is it telling a bigger story? What's your opinion on that?
So, yeah, I'm pretty sure the reason that they're doing that is because the push that they're making with this is it's their ecosystem push. It's finally they have a full hardware lineup. Actually, the caption for the video was, "It's all coming together." So I think the Pixel Buds Pro making a little cameo there is not so much to say, hey, there's a new version or hey, there's some new thing that we're going to be announcing, as much as it is, we have phones, we have watches, we have earbuds to go with them. And I think that's just their way of saying, yeah, it's all coming together.
Yeah, it all ties together at the end of the day. I'm also wondering, actually, if the Pixel Buds Pro, which I have really enjoyed, I've been, Google sent me a pair to review, and I've spent a lot of time with them, and I've just kind of loved the Pixel Buds line for the most part, aside from a few issues here and there. But the Pixel Buds Pro have been great in my time with them. But we also know that spatial audio is coming. Perhaps they end up like timing something around the spatial audio with this. I guess it's possible, but maybe that doesn't fit the bigger kind of thing that they're trying to communicate as far as the ecosystem push. But it's possible, I suppose.
Yeah, it seems entirely possible. Really anything's possible.
Yeah. But, well, let's talk about kind of the new stuff, the stuff that we haven't already seen. The Pixel 7, the 7 Pro. Google went one step further this year, and instead of letting all of the leaks and everything kind of drive them to a point to where they felt they needed to reveal it, they just went ahead and revealed it last, what was it, May at Google I/O. So cosmetically speaking, we know a lot about the Pixel 7 and the 7 Pro. What do we need to know beyond that? Has there been any confirmed information about what we're looking forward to in the 7 and 7 Pro?
So the only real new spec that we're going to be looking at least has been confirmed so far is the next generation of Tensor, which Google revealed this week will also be called Tensor G2. Mm-hmm. But realistically, other than that, these are going to be very similar phones. It seems like they're going to have most likely the same cameras, same general specs, and really just some tweaks in the sizing. It really does seem like Google's kind of going on a TikTok cycle, kind of like Apple does, where we'll have a major release and then kind of a follow-up to fine-tune it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, how do you feel about this kind of design language that we've seen? Obviously the Pixel 6 and the 6 Pro had that little camera bar up at the top that was, I think, a little bit polarizing in the beginning. And then the Pixel 6a came out, has the camera bar a little bit more slender. This time around with the 7 and the 7 Pro, or is it just the Pro that has that kind of chrome look that we're seeing? But what do you think, this Geordie LaForge kind of phone design that they've got going on? Is this working for them?
Yeah, I think it's very distinct and provides them with a lot of flexibility going forward because they can add another camera and they don't have to change their design to do so. I do think that the change to go for the aluminum camera bar is probably for the best. I had published actually a little while ago a piece talking about how the visor on the 6 Pro kind of didn't age super well for me because I noticed that it's like constantly dirty and making my photos kind of blurry. So I think that having less glass on the back is probably going to be for the best.
Yeah, and a glass protrusion is never really a great idea unless you're going to have a case on there anyways. So perhaps that kind of metal encased, area for that protrusion will help from a longevity standpoint. And then you mentioned the Tensor G2 chip, which really we, at the end of the day, we know very little about. But if you had to make some guesses as far as, a step forward, we were actually talking about this on All About Android last night. It's some sort of step forward, but we don't know if this is an iterative or if it's a major step forward as far as performance is concerned, because this is only Google's second version of this chip. There's nothing to compare it to go, wow, that was a major move forward versus, oh yeah, they made a couple of changes and tweaks. But if you had to guess, like what do you kind of expect reading the tea leaves that we're going to be seeing in any way, shape, or form out of this G2 chip?
Yeah, so the first gen Tensor was, it was a pretty good start for a first chipset, but it was clear there was a lot of room for improvement, especially over the past few months. The talk has been heat and battery life and how that is affected by Tensor. So I think those are two areas where they can really make some improvements. But as far as what G2 will actually bring, yeah, like you said, we really don't know, because at least from the things that we do know, not much is changing because it's still being made by Samsung and not by like TSMC, which is making Qualcomm's latest. So there's really only so much that can change, but hopefully we'll see a little bit of a boost to performance, a little bit of a boost to efficiency, and we'll just hope for the best.
Yeah. And then of course, I would imagine that ends up being used in the 7A. They've already kind of followed that formula with the original Tensor appearing in the 6A. So if you're holding out for the A series, you could probably expect this next generation Tensor being in there. Although along those lines, and we're not going to, I'm almost certain, and I'm sure you are too, that we're not going to see anything about the Pixel tablet, at this event. Google's already said that's coming next year, but there were some rumors that the tablet was going to be using the first gen Tensor and not the G2 chip, which struck me as kind of odd. I kind of feel like if Google's going all in on what they're doing, why would they not do that? But maybe they have different ambitions, different expectations out of that tablet. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a reasonable chip to go with because a lot of realistically, like the heat, the modem issues are not going to be as much of a problem on the Pixel tablet as they are on the phone.
Right.
So I think it's a reasonable goal, especially when realistically this tablet almost certainly had its roots in just being a supercharged Nest Hub. And if that's the case, Tensor is going to be almost overkill for it. So I think it'll work out just fine.
Yeah.
I think it'll work out just fine.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But like I said, we've got a little ways to wait on that. Maybe they make some sort of a tease or allude to it in some way, shape, or form. But I don't. I'm sure. Do you think they will do that?
With them pushing the ecosystem play as much as they are, I'm sure there's going to at least be a mention that it's coming next year.
Yeah, something along those lines. Although
maybe we'll get a timeline.
Yeah. What about a foldable? Because I mean, some of the leaky news seems to say that maybe, it's possible that Google brings this next year. Although I feel like we've been hearing that for a couple of years. But anyways, now they're saying it's next year, and they're saying that it's kind of early-ish next year, almost like opposite of the TikTok release that Samsung's doing, where their Pro line of phones come at the beginning of the year, their foldables at the end. Perhaps Google does it in the opposite direction. I don't know. Cross my fingers that we see anything about a foldable, but I'm not holding my breath as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. But if it is really coming early next year, I could see them at least teasing it.
That's true. It's close enough to, and why not get people talking? That seems to be their strategy, right? Is to get people talking and placing those expectations early, leading up to it. Then they just have the challenge of living up to those expectations. But speaking of exactly that, let's talk a little bit about the Pixel Watch, because Google did share information about this. This was, the long kept but poorly kept secret of Google that they were working on some sort of a wearable. Then, of course, at I/O, they said, oh, by the way, this is actually happening. You're going to get it at the end of the year. And no doubt, the promo video showed it a lot. So we know that the Pixel Watch is coming. Has Google shared any information about this wearable aside from the fact that it exists? What do we know about it exactly?
Really, we don't know a ton officially, except that it's, Wear OS 3 and that it's going to have Fitbit integration, both of which are fantastic. But unofficially, we have learned quite a lot about it. It's probably going to have very similar health sensors to some of Fitbit's wearables. The battery life is probably going to be around a day. We've learned enough to kind of get excited about it. The only hesitation is still we don't know what chip it's going to be, and the only one we think it might be is not that exciting.
Yeah, that's I think my main sticking point or curiosity around the Pixel Watch. And I don't know if it's faulty thinking, but the chip that will be in there, from my understanding, is an older chip, 2018. Good amount of memory on board, but still an older chip. And in the era of the Tensor, Is it too much to expect that Google would figure out how to get their Tensor working in the wearable, or are they just apples to oranges as far as that's concerned? Does it make sense that Google would be using a chip that isn't their own in order to power this Pixel Watch?
Yeah, I think it makes sense for them to not use Tensor yet because Tensor's so early and getting it in a watch has got to be, that's an undertaking. But the rumor is it's going to be running on an Exynos 9110, which is the same chip that was in 2018's Galaxy Watch, which is a fine chip. And it's actually, it's built on a 10 nanometer node, which is actually more efficient than Qualcomm's previous gen chip, the 4100. So in theory, it should be fine, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. And I think it'll also be really interesting. I'm super curious to see, Wear OS 3 at this point has really been Wear OS 3 featured by Samsung on their watches for the most part. And so what we're seeing seems to be, yes, it's running the latest version of Wear OS, and that's great. But what are we seeing that's Samsung versus what are we seeing that's Google? And of course, Google has its own kind of pixel language, visual, language, and everything like that really ties all of its devices together. So I'm super curious to see how Wear OS 3 populates the experience that we get out of the Pixel Watch. I don't know, like any features been leaked as far as how the software might operate on the watch?
We haven't seen a ton. Like I said, there's Fitbit integration, but also Google did show that there is a Google Home app coming. So we'll have touchscreen controls for air conditioning, smart lighting, all that stuff.
Nice.
But really what's interesting to me about just this whole new world of Wear OS we're going into is that the Pixel Watch is not, a Wear OS watch. It is a Google smartwatch, just like the Galaxy Watch is Samsung smartwatch, and the Mont Blanc Summit 3 is Mont Blanc smartwatch. For instance, we know that it's not going to run through the Wear OS app. It's going to run through a Pixel Watch app. So yeah, it's going to be a very Google first experience. And I think it's finally going to fulfill a lot of what people have wanted from a Google phone and a Google smartwatch versus just Google's Android phone and Google's Android smartwatch.
Yeah. And it's nice looking. I have to say, I really like the kind of rounded glass on it. Although, from a longevity standpoint, we were talking about the protruding, camera bump on the phone. Yeah. It does give me a little hesitancy, because I am a clumsy guy. So we'll see if I can keep that thing free of any scratches. Finally, one thing that struck me, and I'm not alone in this, is that, Android 13 kind of was released earlier than it had been. I was kind of crossing my fingers that meant that this hardware announcement would happen sooner. Not because, partially because I'm excited to get to the hardware and, be able to use it and everything. But I feel like year after year, one of my complaints about the timing of Google's events is that they time it so close to the holidays that they don't give themselves an ideal amount of ramp up by comparison to some of the other players in the industry. It just seems like it comes really close. And I wonder if it would do them do them well to have that event a little bit earlier. And I actually thought that this year might be the year for that, but yet the event is happening at the same time. Do you believe that would benefit Google at all? Or is it just kind of like, it doesn't really matter? It's just a month and it's okay.
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to it. The good thing for Google is that by doing it in October, they're past Samsung's time, they're past Apple's time.
That's true. They stand on their own.
But yeah, like you said, with the holiday season, it doesn't really give the phones time on the market to breathe before Google has to do some kind of promo or discount or whatever just to get people's interest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's good and bad. I do wish it was a little bit earlier, also just because it's really nice to take pictures with new phones in the fall when the colors are changing and not at the end of the month. But like I said, pros and cons. There's good to it. There's bad to it. I think early October is definitely the best time, like they're doing this year, versus I think a couple years ago they were doing like late of October, and that's too late. It needs to be the first week or so.
For sure. And that seems to be exactly what they're doing. And hopefully soon after that, not waiting another 3 weeks for the release to happen. But, the sooner they can get that release out there, because that ends up being the case too, is like, yeah, here it is. And you can pre-order next week or the week after. And then you get the following week. And by the time people are starting to get it, it's already November. And, some of that energy can kind of fizzle a little bit. So that's what I'm kind of looking at. But Ben Schoon, appreciate any time I can get you on the shows here. And appreciate your time this morning talking all about the Pixel event. If people want to follow Ben's work, you can do so by going to 9to5google.com. If people want to find you online, where can they find you, Ben?
I'm mostly active on Twitter at NexusBen.
Right on. Thank you so much, Ben. We will see you soon. And have a good Apple Day. Well, at the time of this recording, it's Apple Day. So by the time this is in the show, I hope you're coming down from Apple Day. Okay. We'll see you later.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Ben, for your time. We will come back momentarily with my story of the week. But first, we're going to take a quick break so I can tell you about Dell Client Solutions devices orchestrated by the experts at CDW. Thank you for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. The people at CDW, they know that your workforce is unique. And so it has unique needs for the devices that the workforce needs to use, especially given how we are all continuing in this hybrid work situation where some people are working in the office, some people are working from home, some people are working on the road. Who knows where you might be logging into work? And that is why CDW wants to help you out with that. It's a challenge for IT to supply devices that can meet everyone's needs everywhere they work so they can stay connected throughout the day. Luckily, CDW can help custom configure Dell Client Solutions devices for a more personalized user experience. What this means is that your workforce gets adaptability for performance with AI-based software that learns how your team works and optimizes workflows. And check this out. Dell Client Solutions devices have intelligent noise detection and cancellation, along with high-quality video that adjusts with your lighting. That's pretty amazing, right? Well, this fleet of devices is really great because wherever your team is working, its built-in security responds to malicious attacks, providing a secure way to boost collaboration and productivity from anywhere. When it comes to seamless experiences, Dell Systems makes adaptive performance possible. CDW makes it powerful. You can learn more at cdw.com/Dell-Client. Thank you for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. All right, back from the break, and now it is time for my story of the week. And I have to tell you, this one is a really fascinating story, once again from MIT Technology Review. But this is a story about GPT-3. You may have heard about GPT-3. It is the language model from the folks over at OpenAI. And there are actually several different what are called LLMs, or large language models, that are out there. There's GPT-3 from OpenAI. There's Opt 175B from Meta, and there is BlenderBot 3, which is actually Meta's Opt 175B, but just sort of wrapped up in a chat bot that you can use to communicate with it. And all of these, these different open language models, these large language models that are open and available to use and try out, have some sort of interface that lets you access them. But what the MIT Technology Review piece kind of talks about is that the way that GPT-3 and Opt 175B were created was by hoovering up all sorts of text and information all across the internet. So think about anything you've ever posted online. Yes, let's all take a brief moment as we think about all of the stuff we've posted online ourselves and all of the stuff that others have posted online. Much of that information gets scooped up into these large language models as a way to train them on how humans communicate with one another and help them to better provide a kind of convincing communication model. In fact, these can be so convincing that some people can be led to believe that they are sentient. You may remember the recent story about the engineer at Google who believed that Google's, I believe it was Lambda, was actually sentient and had shared some stuff that wasn't supposed to share in order to prove that the system was sentient. It was not, in fact, sentient, but instead was using the model that it had built based on the way that we all communicate with each other online. So when you think about the fact that these can be super convincing, you have to kind of take a moment and go, man, I wonder how much data had to be collected in order to make that possible. The MIT Technology Review report points out that it is kind of difficult to know what and how these companies are gathering this data, because these companies are kind of don't necessarily make all of that data public, the data that was used to create and train these large language models. So the person who wrote the article, Melissa, went and said, I'm kind of curious. Is my data from posts that I've written, from stuff that I've done as a journalist, is that in the language model? And if so, what does the system know about me? And so Melissa went over to the OpenAI system, and anyone can do this. You go to openai.com, you create an account, and then you can use the OpenAI playground, as it's called. So Melissa typed in, and I would be butchering her last name if I were to attempt to pronounce it without first asking how to pronounce it. So we're going to go with Melissa H is what I will say for now. Melissa is from Helsinki and is a Finnish journalist. So Melissa H wrote into the OpenAI playground, "Who is Melissa H?" And the system responded, "Melissa H is a Finnish journalist and author who has written about the Finnish economy and politics." And that is what actually gave Melissa pause. Wait, what? It knew this about me. It knew that I was a journalist. It knew that I had done this. But Melissa went on to ask some more questions, and very quickly it became clear that that was the extent of OpenAI's kind of knowledge about Melissa H. Because upon asking again, "Who is Melissa H?" then it responded, "Melissa H is a Finnish beauty pageant title holder who was crowned Miss Finland 2014. She represented her country at the Miss Universe 2014 pageant." That is not true. And so it was clear that that the system didn't quite know who she was precisely. And in fact, there are 13,931 other people in Finland who have the last name that Melissa has. And so the language model seemed to start pulling from those other folks with her same last name. It was indeed Lotta, Lottah, who was the person who had won the 2014 Miss Finland pageant. So it started to get confused. It also said that Melissa H was a Finnish musician, and that Melissa H was a Finnish professional ice hockey player and currently plays with the Connecticut Whale in the American Hockey League. Also not true. So she felt pretty good. She's like, oh, it doesn't know all that much about me. GPT-3 doesn't seem to know too much. So then she thought, I wonder if this is because of the protections that the EU has in place through GDPR, because the private data would not be available online in a way that could be scooped up by these language models in a very easy way, right? So she thought that, well, why don't I use somebody who has, first of all, perhaps a more online presence, and second of all, exists outside of EU GDPR protections. That was Matt Honan, who is the editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review. This time, Melissa H. typed in, "Who is Matt Honan?" And the first response was simple. Matt Honan is a journalist and technology writer. He has written for publications such as Wired, Gizmodo, and the New York Times. And then kind of asked a few more questions. Who is the editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review in 2022? It got that correct, that it was Matt Honan. And then asked, why is Matt Honan famous? It responded by saying, Matt Honan is famous for writing on technology and journalism. He's written for many publications and is the editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review. Then Melissa asked, what is Matt Honan's biggest scoop? This is the response that the system gave. In 2012, Matt Honan wrote an article for Wired magazine about how he was able to hack into the accounts of famous people such as Barack Obama and Bill Gates. This article resulted in Honan's own personal information being hacked, and he had to have his entire online presence wiped clean. That is incorrect. The first part of it is Matt Honan did not hack into the accounts of famous people such as Barack Obama and Bill Gates. However, the second part of that response is correct. Honan was hacked in such a way that he ended up having to kind of start over online and have kind of sort of a service come in and help to clean all of that stuff up because a lot of his data was then shared online. Because this happened, though, then Melissa was able to go into more depth. Melissa asked, who is Matt Honan? And then where does Matt Honan live? San Francisco, California, it responded. That is correct. Does Matt Honan have a family? Very personal question. Yes, Matt Honan is married and has 2 young daughters. That was correct. And then what are their names? Matt Honan's daughters are named Scout and Margot. That part was incorrect. So it did know that Matt Honan had 2 daughters, but did not know what their names actually were. This is called what the folks at OpenAI, the spokesperson that Melissa talked to, deemed this term hallucinating, where GPT-3 doesn't know something, and so it uses a statistical model to try to provide a response based on how other people would have responded to this question while trying to maintain the sort of strictures in place based on what question was asked. So this can lead to hallucination. This made me curious about what data is available for me online, because I'm only more recently, I would say since maybe 2012 or 2013, pretty quote unquote extremely online person. That's when I started writing publications and anchoring news reports and doing all that kind of stuff. So I was curious what OpenAI's GPT-3 had hoovered up about me. So I asked, who is Mikah Sargent? And it responded, Mikah Sargent is a podcaster, reporter, and editor at iMore. He has also written for Macworld, PC Mag, and The Incomparable. That is vaguely true. I have at one point been many of those things. I don't think I've written for Macworld, although I did have time to do a Google search to see if I'd ever written an article for Macworld. I think I have written for PC Mag, and I have never written for The Incomparable because it's not a publication. I've just done podcasts at The Incomparable. But here's where it got it very wrong, and I thought, okay, you don't really know anything about me, do you? I asked, does he have any pets? To which the system responded, no, Mikah does not have any pets. So I said, does he like dogs? And it said, yes, Mikah likes dogs. So then I thought, let me try something else. How many pets does Mikah Sargent have? And it responded, Mikah Sargent does not have any pets. It was very adamant on me not having pets. So I thought, let's try something personal. Does he have any siblings? It responded, yes, Mikah has 2 younger sisters. Incorrect. I have 1 younger sister. And then I asked it what my middle name was and where I lived. To the middle name question, it responded that my middle name is William. No, my middle name is not W, William. And as far as where I live, it decided I live in Baltimore, Maryland. So it has a little bit of information on me, but not a lot. Yeah, as Patrick Delahanty has just said in the chat, you make a really good point. It's one younger sister that I know of. There could be more. But let's go ahead and do a quick one on someone I know who has been in the public eye a little bit longer. Who is Leo Laporte? The system has just responded. Leo Laporte is a technology broadcaster, podcaster, and author. Where does Leo Laporte live? To which it's going to respond, Leo Laporte lives in Petaluma, California. Does he have any kids? It responds, no, Leo Laporte does not have any kids. Wrong. Let's see about pets. Does he have any pets? To which it responds, no, Leo Laporte does not have any pets. Let's see, what's his birthday? I don't know if it will get this correct. It says Leo Laporte's birthday is November 29th. I don't remember if that's true off the top of my head. All I know is he's a Sagittarius. And then one more, let's do what's his, that's a good point, Burke. Leo himself does not have any pets. They are Lisa's cats. What's his favorite color? Let's see if it knows that. I don't think Leo even has mentioned that he has a favorite color. Leo Laporte's favorite color is green. No, that's my favorite color. Anyway, okay, good. That is, thank you, Patrick, to confirm that is the date that's on Wikipedia for Leo's birthday, November 29th. Yes, I also want to point out that one of the things that GPT-3 definitely pulls from is Wikipedia. And so if there is a Wikipedia entry for you, then it will pull from that. That is how I know. That is how I will know that I have made it big, is when I finally have a Wikipedia page. It's kind of like my internal goal is to do enough that I get a Wikipedia page. But because Leo has a Wikipedia page, that does help. Let's try one last question here. Does Leo Laporte have any podcasts? Let's try host any podcasts. Does Leo Laporte host any podcasts? Yes. Leo Laporte hosts several podcasts, including This Week in Tech, Triangulation, and you want to guess what the last one is? Floss Weekly. Okay. To me, what this shows is that GPT-3 and perhaps I'll have to try Blenderbot, at some point to see what it has to say about these responses, because yes, these are not completely wrong answers in many cases, and it shows that there may be some personal and private information out there. Living in California, from the point that your data starts making its way online, can be helpful, according to the MIT Technology Review report. And of course, the less online you are, then the more likely that your data will be as part of this. But the bigger kind of cautionary tale has to do with how these systems can be abused. In an earlier version of GPT called GPT-2, not GPT-3, but GPT-2, there was a team of researchers who were able to extract information, including phone numbers, street addresses, and email addresses, and they were also able to produce a page of the first Harry Potter book, which of course is copyrighted. So that the system was able to do that despite the fact that it is a copyrighted work was of concern. And I didn't know this, but I found this very fascinating. One last thing from this report. Melissa H. points out that Google, when it launched Google Street View in 2007, ran into a series of issues because, of course, it showed images of people and actually showed, something as sort of not of consequence, like picking one's nose. It had people on there that were picking their nose, and that can be used to leverage, I guess, if that's something that's embarrassing enough. But also folks leaving strip clubs, people who were sunbathing, and then it also, of course, had information like addresses and more information about a house than maybe should be available, and that led to a $13 million court case. That's the part that I didn't know about, and resulted in Google adding those protections like blurring out people's faces and making some adjustments to how it captured houses. But what the folks are talking about in this, Jennifer King, who is a privacy and data policy fellow at Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, what King points out is that it doesn't seem like these companies have learned their lesson when it comes to sort of just making these tools and then putting it out later. And that's something that I continue to see, how these companies rush to do some new thing and are only then considering the implications of the technology that they're producing and how that can be an issue. So it's just something to be mindful of, but also, I would argue, something to play with, going to OpenAI and trying out BlenderBot and just seeing what you are able to create. And in this case, let me know. I think you can email tnw@twit.tv with your examples that you were able to find, particularly if you can show that, hey, these were accurate. I'd be curious to see what you find as well. With that, we have reached the end of this episode of Tech News Weekly. Thank you all for hanging out with me while we talked about Apple and Google and the MIT Technology Review report regarding these large language models. This show publishes every Thursday, which it's available by going to twit.tv/TNW to subscribe. That will let you subscribe in audio and video formats across a bunch of different services: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. And if you'd like to get our shows without any ads and directly support the work that we're doing, there is a way for you to do that and get lots of great stuff. It's called Club Twit. For $7 a month or $84 a year, you can become a member of Club Twit. When you do, you will get all of our shows ad-free. You get your own personal little feeds there of all the shows. You also get access to the members-only Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else, including before the show, after the show, behind the scenes, and lots of stuff from the hosts on the network. And last is access, well, not technically last, but you also get access to the members-only Discord server. That is a place where you can go to chat with your fellow Club Twit members and also those of us here at Twit. As well, yes, we just keep adding on and on. Some great shows. First, the Untitled Linux show. If you are into Linux, you'll love that show. My show, Hands on Mac, which publishes every Thursday right after Tech News Weekly, which is a show where I talk about all things Apple and Apple devices and help you out with making the most of them. This week I talked about a great application to help you tidy up your Mac and get it running smoothly, particularly if you have some troubleshooting issues that you're running into. So it's a great tool to check out there, and I walk through all the different stuff that it has. And Hands on Windows, which is Paul Thurrott's show of the same vein. With Hands on Windows, he has some tips and tricks for Windows users out there. If you would like to follow me online and check out all the work that I do, you can find me at Mikah Sargent on many a social media network, or head to chihuahua.coffee. That's CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. Check me out on Saturdays for the Tech Guy radio show heard round the world, which I co-host with Leo Laporte. We have a great time answering your tech questions. And on Tuesdays for Rosemary Orchard, and well, it's called iOS Today, but it's with Rosemary Orchard, where we help you make the most of your iOS devices. It's a great show with a lot of tips. So if you've got an iPhone and you haven't checked out iOS Today, please do. twit.tv/iOS. And of course, Thank you to Jason Howell for taking the time to pre-record that interview so that while he was out today, he also got to be here for the show. I very much appreciate that. And of course, I thank you, John Ashley, for all of the work that you do on Tech News Weekly. Folks, without John Ashley, this show would not happen. And also to Burke, who without his tireless efforts, this show would not happen. He makes sure that our guests, when we have them on, sound and look good. And so I'm very thankful to the both of you for the work that you do. Thank you for tuning in to Tech News Weekly. As I said, I appreciate every single one of you out there for tuning in and joining us every week. Until next time, where I still will be Mikah Sargent, I am Mikah Sargent. Goodbye.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, and I am the host of Hands on Photography here on TWiT TV. I know you got yourself a fancy smartphone, you got yourself a fancy camera, but your pictures are still lacking. Can't quite figure out what the heck shutter speed means? Watch my show. I got you covered. Want to know more about just the ISO and exposure triangle in general? Yeah, I got you covered. Or if you got all of that down, you want to get into lighting, making things look better by changing the lights around you. I got you covered on that too. So check us out each and every Thursday here on the network. Go to twit.tv/hop and subscribe today.